Mickey Mantle stepped out in front of America in the summer of 1995 with a body that almost no one had ever thought they would see on him. For decades, when people mentioned Mickey Mantle, they thought they knew exactly who that man was. That was number 7 of the New York Yankees, the one who could stand on both sides of home plate and hit a ball so far that even Yankee Stadium had to look up. The one who won the Triple Crown, 3 MVP titles, 7 World Series championships, and finished his career with 536 home runs. Millions of American boys once stood in the backyard, holding a bat and trying to imitate him. But the man who appeared before the public that summer was almost no longer like the image America had held in its mind for 40 years. He was 63 years old, noticeably thinner after the liver transplant, his face gaunt, the body that once seemed indestructible now weakening rapidly. He still smiled, he still joked. Then he said something that no child who had ever idolized him expected to hear. "Don't be like me." The man the whole country once wanted to become was telling America not to live like him. Mantle said that God had given him a wonderful body to play baseball, but he had not taken care of it. There were no home runs in that sentence, no World Series, only a man finally looking straight at the years of alcohol, pain, loss, and a life too often lived as if tomorrow did not exist. The public Mickey Mantle was the golden boy from Oklahoma, the successor to Joe DiMaggio, and one of America's most beloved athletes. Mickey Mantle, when the lights went out, was a man carrying an injury from age 19, who lost his father at just 20, living in a marriage full of wounds and having children he loved but did not always know how to be a father to. So who was he really behind number 7 and the home runs? Why did a man the whole country saw as a symbol of strength live so long as if he did not need a future? And what happened between Mickey Mantle under the lights of Yankee Stadium and the man who finally had to tell the children who wanted to become him not to follow that path? This is the double life of Mickey Mantle. Before there was number 7, before Yankee Stadium, before the home runs that made all of America look up, there was only a boy growing up in the dust of Oklahoma and a father who knew all too well how a man's body could be crushed by work. Mickey Charles Mantle was born on October 20, 1931, and grew up in Commerce, Oklahoma, where the lead and zinc mines were not just a way to make a living, but almost a destiny waiting for the sons if they could not find a way out. His father, Elvin "Mutt" Mantle, worked in that environment and understood its price with his own back, lungs, and hands. He did not want Mickey to follow that path. So when Mickey was still small, Mutt began throwing balls to his son in the yard, day after day, as if each throw was a way to push his son farther from the earth. He taught Mickey to hit from both sides, helping create the switch-hitting ability that later became one of the most famous weapons in baseball history. There was an urgency in the way Mutt trained his son because he did not see baseball as just a game. To him, it was a door. If Mickey was good enough, perhaps he would not have to go down into the mine. Perhaps his son's body would not have to pay the same price his father's body was paying. And Mickey had talent. He was fast, strong, competitive, and had hands that made adults stop and look. But from very early on, that body also showed it was not invincible. While still in high school, an injury while playing football led to osteomyelitis, a serious bone infection in his leg. In an era when that kind of disease could still push a young athlete toward the end of a career, even the loss of a leg, Mickey's future once stood before a frightening line. The treatment saved his leg and saved the baseball path as well. But it left a lesson that Mickey at that time perhaps did not yet fully understand. The body can betray a person at any time. He came back, continued to play, and eventually was signed by the Yankees. But the professional path did not immediately open like a fairy tale. In the minor leagues, Mickey had stretches so bad that he began to think he was not good enough. There were times he wanted to quit, go back to Oklahoma, and let the dream end before New York ever knew his name. Mutt did not accept that. He came to see his son, began packing up, and in essence said that if Mickey did not want to play baseball anymore, he could come home and work in the mine with him. There was no long speech, no comfort. only a very clear choice between the life Mutt was living and the life he believed his son could have. Mickey stayed, he continued to play, but right beneath that determination was another fear that had existed in the family for a long time. The Mantle men did not have a history of living long. Illness and early death appeared often enough to become something a boy could grow up hearing in family stories. Mickey gradually carried the idea that he too might not have many years ahead. When he was young, that was only a shadow. Later, it would become a way of living. But at that time, Mutt only saw what he wanted to see most: his son moving farther from the mine, one game at a time, one swing at a time. He had done what he set out to do. He had opened another future for Mickey. What Mutt could not know was that he would not have enough time to see how large that future would become. And Mickey could not yet know that the father who had just saved him from a life underground would soon become the greatest loss in his own life. And then that future brought Mickey Mantle to New York so quickly that he himself almost did not have time to understand what was happening. In 1951, he was only 19 years old when he stepped into the New York Yankees, a team that did not wait for anyone to grow up slowly. Joe DiMaggio was already there, a name so large that any young person standing near him could easily be turned into a shadow. Mickey did not just have to play baseball. He had to prove that a boy from Oklahoma could exist under the lights of America's largest city, among impatient stands and newspapers ready to turn a bad day into a verdict. The first months were not easy. Strikeouts came. Confidence disappeared bit by bit. There were times Mickey was sent back to the minor leagues, and the feeling of failure returned to the exact place Mutt had once pulled him out of. But this time the father did not need to pack a suitcase anymore. Mickey remembered the choice that had once been placed in front of him, remembered the mine, remembered the throws in the yard, and he stayed with the game. Then came that year's World Series, when everything seemed to be just beginning to fall into place. The body betrayed him again. While chasing a ball with DiMaggio, Mantle stumbled and seriously injured his right knee. He was only 19 years old. That is what needs to be remembered when looking back at everything that happened afterward. One of the most explosive athletes in baseball history began much of his great career with a knee that was no longer completely intact. Later audiences saw the speed. They saw the runs from home plate, the fierce swings, the balls disappearing into the stands. They did not see the mornings with a swollen knee, the taping, the treatments, the pain that had to be hidden before game time. There were days Mantle stepped onto the field as if nothing had happened, and that was exactly what made it easy for people to forget that so many things had happened. His body constantly demanded a price, but New York only saw the results. And then, while Mickey was still learning to live with physical pain, another loss came that no bandage could heal. In 1952, Mutt Mantle died of Hodgkin's disease. Mickey was only 20 years old. The man who had stood in the yard throwing every ball to his son, who had forced him back when he wanted to quit, who had believed baseball could take his son out of the mine, died just as that dream was beginning to become real. Mutt had lived long enough to see Mickey put on a Yankees uniform, but not long enough to see the Triple Crown, the MVP seasons, the championships, or number 7 becoming part of American history. For Mickey, losing his father was not just losing a relative, it was losing the person who had given him the first reason to believe he could become something else. And that death made an old fear become more real. In the Mantle family, men dying young was no longer a distant story. His father had died before his eyes when he was just over 40. Mickey began living with the idea that perhaps he too did not have much time. Later he would talk about life expectancy as something he once did not think he needed to prepare for. But at that time, that thought had not yet become words. It showed in the way he lived. Drinking began to take up more space. Nightlife became easier as fame increased. Alcohol could make the pain in the knee lighter for a few hours, make the silence after Mutt's death less heavy, make a 20-year-old forget that the man he still wanted to call home was no longer there. No one standing in the stands saw that part. They only saw Mickey Mantle continue to step onto the field. And perhaps that was the most tragic thing about those early years. Before America had time to understand how great he was, Mickey had already learned to do two things at once: play through a hurting body and live through a loss he had never really known how to put down. And it was from that body that had already begun to break that Mickey Mantle created the years that made all of America believe he was almost unbeatable. By 1956, every doubt about whether the Oklahoma boy was strong enough to become Joe DiMaggio's successor had almost disappeared. Mantle hit .353, hit 52 home runs, drove in 130 RBI, and won the Triple Crown, an achievement whose numbers alone were enough to put a player into history. But what made that season even more unbelievable was that the man who created it did not step onto the field with a completely healthy body. The knee that had once been injured, the legs that had begun to carry pains most spectators did not see. Yet every night he still stepped out as if he had never known what pain was. The next year he won MVP again. World Series championships continued to come. His home runs grew longer and longer, told as stories larger than the ballparks where they happened. And number 7 gradually was no longer just a number on a Yankees jersey. It became part of America's childhood. Children took gloves into the backyard, imitated the way Mantle stood at the plate, competed to see who could hit the ball farthest, then ran around imaginary bases as if Yankee Stadium were opening right behind the fence. To them, Mickey Mantle did not age, did not hurt, did not have mornings when it was hard to get out of bed. He only appeared, hit the ball, and won. Then in 1961, the attention on him reached a level that could almost not get any larger. Mantle and Roger Maris entered a home run race that made America follow every game, every swing, every number changing on the scoreboard. The press wanted a confrontation. Fans wanted history. Mantle finished with 54 home runs, while Maris reached 61. But throughout that summer, almost no Yankees game was simply a baseball game anymore. Every time Mantle stepped to the plate, the whole country waited. His fame had gone beyond the field. But those close to Mickey remembered something else. Even as one of the biggest superstars of the era, he could still make fun of himself, joke in the clubhouse, talk to young players, and did not always act as if the whole room had to revolve around him. Whitey Ford and many teammates remembered a Mickey who was funny, sometimes mischievous, but also capable of making a rookie feel less like an extra among the giant names. And that was exactly what made his image even more solid. America did not just love the numbers. They loved the feeling that the strongest man on the field was still the boy from Oklahoma somewhere inside. But fame also opened another world after every game. Late nights, bars, clubhouse culture, friends always ready for another drink, and the feeling that a person at the peak could postpone the consequences for one more day. Drinking gradually went with celebrity almost naturally, and as long as Mickey continued to hit, run, win titles, and appear before packed stands, very few people had reason to think the price was rising. By the end of the peak years, America had completed its image of Mickey Mantle. No. 7. Strong, handsome, unbreakable. The one who could play through pain and still make baseball look easy. But what the scoreboard could not record was also growing with the years. A body used too much. The sadness about a father that had never really left. Nights of drinking growing longer, and a habit of living as if the future was something other people needed to worry about. But while America saw Mickey Mantle everywhere, Merlyn Johnson increasingly had to learn to live with a husband who was often not at home. They married at the end of 1951, when Mickey was still just a young player who had just stepped into the Yankees, before number 7 became a symbol, before children across America knew his name, before the trips, the parties, and the long nights began to swallow most of their private life. In the early years, they built a family that seemed like anyone could wish for. 4 sons were born one after another: Mickey Jr., David, Billy, and Danny. From the outside, that was the almost perfect picture of a mid-20th century American family. A husband who was a sports star, a wife at home, children growing up under a name the whole country admired. But those living inside that house understood that fame did not only bring money and applause, it also took Mickey away from them. The baseball season was long. Road trips followed one after another. Public appearances never really ended. And when the game was over, nightlife began. Merlyn did not only have to share her husband with the Yankees, she had to share him with the city, with the fans, with friends, with the bars, and with the other women who appeared in his life. Mantle's extramarital relationships later were no longer something the family tried to deny. Merlyn and the children spoke openly about them, but the most painful part was not in the number of affairs or the names of any women. It was in what they did to a wife who had married Mickey before the whole country began to regard him as common property. Merlyn loved him. She was proud of him. But she also had to live with the feeling of being left behind by the very success she had once hoped would bring the family a better life. Alcohol made everything harder. At first, drinking was just part of a player's life. Late dinners, nights with teammates, celebrations after games. But over the years, it was no longer simply a good time. Mickey drank more, and alcohol began to go with him from the clubhouse all the way home. Merlyn, who before marriage almost never drank, was also gradually pulled into that world. Sometimes drinking was a way for her to be with her husband in a life she did not really belong to. Sometimes it was a way to soothe the loneliness. And gradually, alcohol was no longer Mickey's problem alone. It became something present in the whole family, seeping into meals, arguments, silences, occasions that should have belonged to husband and wife and children. What made this story sadder was that there was no evidence Mickey did not love his family. He could be generous. He could be fun with the children. He could fill a room with laughter. But love was not always enough to defeat addiction, fame, and the habit of living as if tomorrow was still very far away. Merlyn could see a husband who still had feelings for her and at the same time see that same man continually doing things that hurt her. That was a marriage in which affection and resentment existed together, where pride in what Mickey had achieved could not erase the disappointment in what he could not give the family. Over time, the distance between them did not need a big explosion to become impossible to cross. It accumulated season after season, trip after trip, night after night of not coming home, promise after promise not strong enough to stand against a habit that had lasted too long. In the end, Mickey and Merlyn lived apart, but they did not turn the marriage into a public battle, and did not formally divorce. They were still connected by 4 children, by decades of history, and by a kind of feeling that does not disappear just because living together has become too difficult. America still saw Mickey Mantle as the Yankees' hero, still saw number 7, the home runs and the old film clips that never aged. Merlyn saw something else. She saw the man before the legend, the man after the stands were empty, and the price a family had to pay when the whole country loved a person too much but that person himself did not know how to keep those closest to him really close. If the marriage with Merlyn showed how far Mickey Mantle had gone from his family, the relationship with his sons revealed the most painful part of that distance. Because Mickey had once had a father who almost put his entire life into his son's future. Mantle worked in the mine, came home with a tired body, then still stood in the yard throwing balls to Mickey, correcting every swing, teaching his son to hit from both sides, following every step as if baseball was not just a game, but the only path for the boy to escape a life underground. Mickey grew up with a father who was always there, but his 4 sons grew up in a very different situation. They had a father whose name all of America knew, a father who appeared on radio, television, baseball cards, and sports pages, but that fame also meant Mickey was always divided into too many parts. One part belonged to the Yankees, one part belonged to the long trips, one part belonged to public appearances, one part belonged to the nights of drinking and the friends always there after the game, and the remaining part only came home. Danny Mantle later remembered that, when he was small, he was sometimes afraid of his father. That is a very small detail, but it says more than any statistics. Millions of American children looked at Mickey Mantle and saw a hero. One of his own children looked at him and sometimes did not know how to get close. David Mantle later also wondered what it would feel like if a person had a father who was always present in his life. The bitter thing was that Mickey understood that feeling very well, because Mutt had been exactly that kind of father to him. But fame, alcohol, and the lifestyle of a superstar made Mickey unable to repeat what he had received. As the children grew older, the distance between them and their father began to change, but not in the way a family should hope. Drinking became one of the ways they could sit with Mickey as equals. Danny said that when they were old enough to drink with their father, the relationship became easier. Mickey could laugh with them, tell stories, relive the camaraderie he had once had with Billy Martin, Whitey Ford and the teammates in the Yankees years. Alcohol had broken the family, but strangely it also became a twisted bridge connecting father and sons. And that is perhaps one of the most painful paradoxes in Mantle's life. Mutt used baseball to get close to his son. Mickey let alcohol become one of the things that helped him get close to his own children. Not because he deliberately wanted it that way, not because he did not love them, but because for many years he seemed to know how to be a good teammate better than how to be a father. On the field, everything was clear. There was a pitcher, there was a count, there were bases, there was a job that had to be finished before the game ended. In the family, there was no scoreboard to say whether he was winning or losing. No manager coming out to replace him when things became too hard. And then baseball also disappeared. Mantle retired after the 1968 season. The man whose schedule had been measured by batting practice, road trips, pennant races, and World Series now woke up with no next game. Number 7 was retired by the Yankees to immortality. In 1974, the Hall of Fame officially placed his name in history. Public appearances continued. Fans still lined up for autographs and told how they had once seen him hit a home run somewhere 20 years earlier. But immortality in baseball's memory could not tell Mickey what he had to do with ordinary days. The uniform disappeared, but the pains did not. Fame remained, but the purpose that had structured life was no longer the same. Those empty spaces created more room for drinking. One drink became many drinks. Meetings with friends easily revolved around alcohol. A public appearance could end with a night of drinking. A day without an appearance could end the same way. And while Mickey continued to be remembered by America as a man forever young in the old film clips, his children began to grow up in a family where alcohol had become too familiar. Problems with alcohol and substances began to appear in the next generation. It cannot simply be said that Mickey created all of his children's difficulties. Each person's life is more complicated than that. But Mickey himself later would look back and wonder what he had contributed to. That is the painful part. A man who had been given by his father a path out of destiny, with every ball thrown in the backyard, began to see his own habits reflected in the children he loved. Mutt had given Mickey a future through presence. Mickey had fame, money, the Hall of Fame, and a whole America that loved him. But none of that could replace the years a father should have been there. And by the time he began to understand that more clearly, alcohol was no longer just a part of Mickey Mantle's life. It had become a part of the Mantle family story. And then in early 1994, after decades in which alcohol had gone with Mickey Mantle through clubhouses, hotels, autograph sessions, and even the empty spaces after baseball ended, his body finally forced him to hear what his loved ones had not been able to make him hear for years. The doctors warned that his liver had been seriously damaged, and if he continued to drink, the consequences could come very quickly. Mickey had once played through a hurting knee, once stepped into the batter's box when his body did not want to take another step, once believed that if he endured long enough everything would pass. But this time there was no game left for him to play through. He entered the Betty Ford Center, and what happened afterward let the family see a Mickey they had almost waited a lifetime for. Not Noke 7. Not the man telling stories at parties, just Mickey, sober, softer, able to say things that before had usually been hidden behind laughter or a drink. He began to express love for his children more clearly, said he was proud of them, grew closer to the grandchildren, and seemed for the first time to understand that presence was more valuable than any World Series story. But just as the door to repair was opening, another door closed forever. In March of 1994, Billy Mantle, the son named after Billy Martin, died at only 36 years old. Billy had lived with Hodgkin's disease and also gone through problems related to alcohol and substances. For Mickey, this was not only the death of a son, It was the appearance of a question he could never answer. What if he had gotten sober earlier? What if he had been home more? What if in the years the children needed a father, he had been a father instead of a drinking companion? No one can say for sure that Billy's life would have been different. Mickey could not know either. But that did not stop the father from asking. And for the first time, he faced a loss that toughness had no effect on. No ninth inning, no last swing, no way to hit the ball far enough to bring Billy back. In the thoughts Mantle left from his time in treatment, he wrote about the things he had done with a regret that almost had no place left to hide, that they hurt him to the core, and that he could not undo them. That is perhaps the cruelest thing about sobriety for Mickey. Alcohol had once blurred the past. When the alcohol disappeared, the past was still there, clearer than ever. He could apologize to those still living, could call a child, could sit with the grandchildren longer, could learn to say what he had not said before. But Billy no longer had time to receive anything more from his father. And Mickey, who had grown up believing he would die young, finally began to understand that the tragedy was not only in how short a life was, sometimes it was in living long enough to realize how many years he had missed. What is worth noting is that after Billy's death, Mickey did not go back to drinking. He stayed sober. He continued to try to get close to the remaining children, continued to learn how to become the father he himself admitted he had never completely known how to be. He could not fix the past, and he knew that. But for the first time in decades, Mickey Mantle was no longer running from it. And it was just when Mickey Mantle finally stopped running from the past that his body began to deliver a sentence that no regret could change. The years of drinking, illness, and accumulated damage had left heavy consequences. His liver was severely cirrhotic. He also had hepatitis C, and then the doctors found liver cancer. The man America had once seen as an almost perfect body now had to live in a body that no longer had the strength to save itself. On June 8, 1995, in Dallas, Mantle underwent a liver transplant. The surgery opened a new hope, but almost immediately also brought debate across America. Why did a famous person with a history of alcoholism receive a donated liver so quickly? Had fame helped him go ahead of others? Those questions appeared in the newspapers, in debates about organ allocation and personal responsibility. But inside the Mantle family, the issue was much simpler. They did not see a sports icon being favored. They saw a father, a grandfather, a husband who had gotten sober too late and was trying to ask for more time to live differently. After the surgery, Mickey appeared in public noticeably thinner, his face gaunt, his body weaker than any image fans had ever been used to. But he still smiled. He still joked. And when asked about his chance of living, he said he thought he would make it, because all his life he had always thought he would make it. That sentence sounded more like Mickey Mantle than anything else. He had gotten through osteomyelitis, the ruined knee, the painful seasons, the slumps, the years of drinking, and finally rehab. In the mind of a player like Mantle, perhaps everything was still a game that could be turned around if he just stood there long enough. But this time, what he was trying to hold on to was no longer a season. It was time with family. In those very weeks, he spoke publicly about his sons with a frankness that young Mickey almost never had. He admitted that for many years he had not really been like a father but more like a drinking buddy. Then he said that now, sober, he finally felt he was becoming their father. There is something almost unbearably painful in that sentence. The man who had had decades to be a father was only beginning to understand how to do it when his body was running out of time. At first, the transplant gave everyone reason to believe he would have those extra years. But the hope did not last. The doctors soon found the cancer had spread. This time there was no pitcher to read, no fastball to wait for, no ninth inning to stretch the game longer. Talent did not help. Toughness did not help. Money, fame, and the name Mickey Mantle could not make the disease turn back. The man who had spent most of his youth living as if he would die young, and therefore did not need to prepare for old age, finally wanted the very thing he had once not thought he would need. Not another home run, not another World Series, just more time. Another meal with the children. Another sober day. another chance to become the father he had only just learned how to be. And for the first time in Mickey Mantle's life, time was the only opponent he knew for certain he could not beat. On August 13, 1995, Mickey Mantle died in Dallas at the age of 63, ending a life he himself had once believed would perhaps not last long enough to enter old age. The man who had lived as if tomorrow was not something that needed to be prepared for finally died at the exact moment he began to understand how much he wanted more tomorrows. Merlyn was still there. The children were still there. The grandchildren were still there. That family had gone through alcoholism, the extramarital relationships, the years of distance, Billy's death, and too many wounds that could not disappear with just an apology. But they were still his family, and that is perhaps the most important thing in the final part. Because the double life of Mickey Mantle was never simply the story of a public hero and a fake behind closed doors. Both Mickeys were real. The one who wore number 7, who won the Triple Crown, who hit 536 home runs, who played through pain, and was remembered by teammates as a superstar who could still be funny, humble, and kind, was real. The unfaithful husband, the frequently absent father, the man who drank too much and made those closest to him suffer, was also real. And at the end of his life, Mantle no longer tried to make America see only one of those two people. That is why the sentence, "Don't be like me," carries a different meaning when looking back at his entire life. He was not telling children not to dream big, not to compete, not to love baseball, or not to fight when the body hurt. He was saying, do not treat health as if it is endless. Do not use alcohol to postpone pain. Do not think fame can replace presence. And do not wait until time is almost gone to tell the family what should have been said many years earlier. In the end, the story returns to Mutt Mantle, the miner who stood in the backyard throwing balls to his son and gave Mickey a future different from his own. Mickey spent his whole life turning that gift into a career America would never forget, but only at the end of his life did he understand that the most precious thing Mutt gave was not the switch-hitting technique or the path to the Yankees. It was presence. Mickey Mantle could not go back to become a different husband or father from the beginning. He could not bring Billy back. He could not take back a body that had been used too long as if it did not need tomorrow. But he could tell the truth, and he did that. Perhaps that is the most honorable part of Mickey Mantle. Not that he lived without making mistakes, but that when time was almost gone, he finally had enough courage to look straight at the price of those mistakes and warn the people who had wanted to become him not to have to learn the same lesson too late. If the story of Mickey Mantle makes you see a different person behind the legendary number 7 jersey, please subscribe to the channel so we can explore more extraordinary lives, the losses and the truths behind America's icons. Thank you for staying until the end of the story of an imperfect hero who was brave enough to admit the things he could not fix, and see you in the next video.